So I started creating several prototypes of what we now call the React.js library. So React didn't just solve one problem. I know it's good to just solve one problem, but React actually solved multiple problems at once. Kind of made it confusing to explain to people, like, here's the value of React, but it did solve several. So first, it allowed us to render that markup on either the server or the client. We didn't have to decide up front. So that means that you can render all your app on the client, and then if the constraints change, maybe you're in a different area where network location or network bandwidth is less or latency is higher, you can switch to rendering that on the server. But the coolest thing about React is that it brought the ideas of functional programming and immutability to a wide audience. Some people might not really like to admit that, but they might say, oh, I never said I liked functional programming or anything. And that's fine. I think we should meet people where they are. And I find that if you just call it declarative programming, it's an easier pill to swallow. It's like they don't have to question their identity as a programmer or anything. Okay, so I showed some of these earlier prototypes to people. And this is more or less what it looked like. A couple of renames are different there. But when I showed this to people, I was hoping we'd have a great conversation about all the ideas of React. This is a good idea, that's not a good idea, maybe poke some holes in it. But it didn't go down like that. So when I showed this to people, what a large percentage of them saw in their heads was this. This endless stream of closing brackets and braces. So it turns out that developers at Facebook at the time, so they were used to this dialect of PHP where you can embed XML inside of your code. Okay, so I kind of listened to that feedback, and I dusted off some diffs from Adam Hupp and some old parsers by Marcel, and I pieced together this diff where I implemented JSX as we know it today inside of React. So it looked like this. What's cool is that this wasn't like a fundamental change or anything. All we were doing was just taking this and then turning it exactly into what we saw before. Literal just function calls. You just do it at the parse time almost. So I thought, okay, that's great. And the difference in reception was night and day. People were like, whoa, that looks great. So what's this React about? Because we could actually get past this initial friction here and talk about the real ideas that matter. So React gained some adoption internally, and it looked like it was going pretty well, and we decided it's time to open source React. And so all we had to do was just show the world what we built, and then we'll get the same kind of enlightened response that we had internally. That's what I thought. Until I got to this slide, where I showed the syntax that we were using. And it's kind of funny because I remembered looking out at the audience and just seeing this sea of furrowed brows and like angry faces, and people were just like visibly upset. And I was like, wow, what did I say? Do they just really not like immutability or something? And so we talked with some people out after the conference, and it turns out that they really didn't, they took issue with our syntax extension. And, it's water under the bridge. There were some harsh words on Twitter, which we don't really need to relive right now. But, eventually people got over it, and they were able to see the ideas of React, and we could talk about that, and that's important. So some people might say, all right, syntax, yeah, it can be an issue at first, but if I just persist through it, if other people just persist through it, they'll get over it. They'll see the real value behind your technology. And that's true. But I like to think about pushing new technology kind of like, I think of it like pushing a really heavy stone on the ground. And you have two kinds of frictions that you're working against here. You have static friction and kinetic friction. So static friction tells you how hard you have to push this thing initially to get it moving, and then kinetic friction tells you how hard or how much more energy you need to put into the system to keep it moving once it's already in motion. And so you might think, oh yeah, this stone is really great, and if people just push the initial phase, they'll see how great it is afterwards. But the problem is, there isn't just one stone. So every day on Hacker News, you have 20 stones, all telling you, this is going to solve your problems. And some of these stones, they don't have any kinetic, or they don't have any static friction at all. You can just start pushing them right now. So people don't have to trust them that the technology is going to deliver once they invest. So that's what you're working against. The other problem is that you're not the only one pushing. So you want to get coworkers project contributors on board, you want to get them ramped up, you want them to take a look at your project and send a pull request. So it's not really just about you. It's about what other people think too, and that matters. So my suggestion is to ruthlessly remove all of the static friction that you can in your technologies. And so the core lesson that we learned from just the open sourcing process of React and the internal adoption is that syntax matters. It really does. It's really highly subjective, but it matters because it influences the outcomes. And that's what we care about. All right, so fast forwarding 6 years, we've open sourced React. It's grown, it's become popular. There's a full-time team dedicated to innovating React, maintaining it, improving it, and they're doing a killer job. React has quarter billion downloads per year from NPM. If you were to count all of the downloads from the content delivery and all the way to the client machines, it's well into the billions per year. I haven't ever really calculated it, but all right. So React brings better patterns to your components. Sounds great, but where do we go from here? Is that all we can do? What about the rest of your code base? What about your code that isn't components? What about static types? That was that other problem that seemed unsolved in 2010. That's something that only a language should really solve. If we're going to embrace a new language, we really want one that matches React. So Reason brings what people like about React to the programming language level, to the rest of their code base. It picks up where React left off.